In 2003, a horrific trap was set for police officer Jason Ellis as he was driving home from a shift in the early hours of May 25th. Who set this trap, why, and what the brutal outcome of it was, we will cover in this video. But every year for the next few years, there would be some sort of horrific attack, killing, or disappearance, and some of them, if not all of them, may very well be connected. So grab a drink, my choice today is black coffee, and join me as we explore the Bardstown murders. This case brings us to Bardstown, a once sleepy little town of 13,000 in the state of Kentucky, United States. In 2012, it was named the most beautiful small town by USA Today. And before this string of horrific murders and crimes, it was mostly known for its bourbon, as Bardstown is officially the bourbon capital of the world. Now, to get to the bottom of this case of whiskey, we need to go back to where it all began. At 2:30 in the morning on exit 34 of the Bluegrass Parkway, on May 25th, 2013. It was a fairly calm, fairly normal, slightly chilly morning, and Jason Ellis, a police officer for the Bardstown Police Department, had just gotten off shift and was on his way home when he noticed some tree branches in the middle of the road. They were blocking his way, and while these didn't look naturally placed, perhaps he thought it was the work of some local kids or something, playing a somewhat dangerous prank on drivers. And Jason was a good, community-driven man. It was definitely not in his nature to simply drive around the tree branches. So he stopped his car, got out, and went to clear the road when he was shot. He was hit all over his body by several shotgun blasts, and Jason immediately collapsed. A few minutes later, two cars pulled up behind Jason's car. These were just innocent civilians who got out to see if they could help Jason with whatever he was doing. But when they got near, they saw Jason collapsed on the floor, completely unresponsive, in a pool of blood. They immediately called for help using the radio in Jason's car.
Officer down, Bluefield Road. Station. Officer down. There's been a tree limb or something. Officer down, please, emergency.
Ma'am, can you advise the status of the officer? Is he conscious?
I believe he's dead.
I come home from Heaven Hill Distillery, and there was the police car is sitting in the middle of the road with the lights on. And we didn't know what it was. It's a tree across the road. And I got out and I went up there and looked, and it's him. I believe somebody hit him.
Okay, can you tell if he is breathing?
No, sir, he is not breathing. Body temperature is cold.
But sadly, Jason had lost too much blood, and when the paramedics arrived, Jason was pronounced dead. He was the only canine officer on the force, which will play an important role a little later on, and he was the first member of the Bardstown police force to be killed on duty. His funeral was held 5 days later, which was attended by his wife, his two boys, the entire police force, and his police canine partner, Figo, who paid his respects to his lifelong best friend by laying his paw on Jason's casket. The entire attack was planned quite meticulously. The shooter knew Jason's schedule and route home, and the tree branches and limbs that were blocking Jason's path were from a tree not even local to the area, meaning that someone had cut them from somewhere else entirely, then brought and dumped them here for exactly this purpose. This was not a spur-of-the-moment killing. It is thought that after laying the trap, the shooter laid in wait for Jason just off the road, and the precision with which these shots were made pointed to it being someone who was skilled with a gun, possibly military or police, and the fact that the shooter knew Jason's schedule and his route home pointed to it being someone that he knew, again possibly on the police force. Now, regarding the police force, an important thing to note is that while a fair few members of the police force are completely clean, there was and still is a ton of corruption, often involving narcotics and drug trafficking, and Bardstown is now well known for this corruption. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Jason was the only canine police officer on the entire force, and he often worked with narcotics, as dogs tend to have a good nose for that sort of thing. They're not addicted, they just really like the way the drugs smell. So it's entirely possible that Jason saw or discovered something that someone didn't want him to see or discover, and he was ultimately killed for it. There were never really any clear suspects, but if certain higher-ups on the police force were in on it, it wouldn't have been that hard to miss certain pieces of evidence, or to severely stall or even unofficially stop the investigation into Jason's death. And even though over the years up to $200,000 has been offered as a reward, the reward was never claimed, and to this day Jason's death is still an open case. So for this next one, we don't have to travel very far. In fact, it's really only a few miles down the road from where Jason was killed, and this was less than a year later. On April 22nd, 2014, Kathy Netherland and her daughter hadn't shown up for school or for work. Kathy worked as a special education teacher, and her daughter Samantha was a 16-year-old student. So after they both failed to show up, Kathy's father decided to head out to their house to check up on them. When there was no answer at the door, he decided to peek through the window to see if he could see them, and what he saw completely shook him. Kathy was lying motionless on the dining room floor, and when he ran around the back of the house to get a different view, from the window there he saw his 16-year-old granddaughter also lying completely unresponsive on the floor. And when he called police, what they found inside the house was a thing of nightmares. Both Kathy and Samantha were brutally beaten. They both had their throats slit, and Kathy had died from a gunshot, while Samantha's attacks seemed more personal, having been bludgeoned and stabbed to death. Now, the possible whys for Jason's murder were a little more straightforward. He was a cop specializing in narcotics in a town that had heavy corruption, often involving drug trafficking. So it's not that difficult to imagine some sort of motive or reason for his killing. But Kathy and Samantha, they were two of the most normal, nice, kind people you could or would ever meet. Kathy was your typical 16-year-old kid, funny, smart, and just interested in school and friends. And Kathy was a loving mother and a special needs teacher at a local school. A motive, any motive for these killings beyond just pure violent psychopathy was extremely hard to find. There was an anonymous prison inmate that said that these killings were a result of a gang initiation, where in order to be allowed into a certain gang, you basically needed to go out and take part in horrific killings like this. He also said he knew that certain trinkets were taken as trophies, and that a cell phone jammer was actually placed near the front door of the house in order to kill all cell phone signal, preventing Kathy and Samantha from making a call for help. He said that he knew all of these things, but the police never really confirmed if any of those claims were true, such as the presence of a cell phone jammer or if any trinkets were taken. Any obvious suspects, like close family members or even Samantha's boyfriend, were quickly ruled out by police, and it seemed like just due to how brutal and personal Samantha's wounds were compared to her mother's, that she might have been the primary target for these attacks. But again, that is just a theory. And to make things a little more creepy, about 4 months before the murders, Kathy posted a picture of their storm door with the glass on it shattered. She believed it to have been shattered by the intense wind on that day, but some savvy internet detectives did some calculations on the wind speed and of the type of door and the strength of the glass, and determined that the wind on that day could not have possibly broken the glass, which meant that according to this theory, that had perhaps been an initial attempt to break into the Netherlands home and to potentially attack and kill them. A trial run, if you will. A black Chevy Impala was seen on CCTV nearby on the evening of the killings, and the police said that whoever was in that car was in the house at the time that the crime was committed. But the car and its driver were never located, and still to this day, Kathy's and Samantha's murders remain unsolved. Now, the links between these murders so far are a little flimsy. Jason Ellis's son had Down syndrome, and Kathy Netherlands was a special education teacher. So it's possible that Kathy was maybe teaching Jason Ellis's son, and maybe on some of the days when Jason went to pick up his son, he told Kathy something related to the corruption in the town. But that link is purely hypothetical. What does have a somewhat strong link, however, is the disappearance and suspected murder of Crystal Rogers. This was once again a little over a year later. According to Brooks, her boyfriend, who she was living with at the time, he, Crystal, and their 2-year-old son had gone out for a walk around his family farm in the pouring rain for a few hours, and then they went back home. Brooks went to bed and Crystal stayed up playing video games. And when Brooks woke up the next morning, Crystal had vanished. Brooks apparently didn't think it was very odd, and so she wasn't officially reported missing until 2 days later when her mother couldn't get a hold of her.
The next morning around 8 o'clock, you noticed that she's missing. Did you report her missing?
No, ma'am.
Why?
That is a great question, and one that I definitely want to hit the public and the media. I was not in the least little bit alarmed in any way, shape, or form.
So this whole story that Brooks was telling was a little flimsy. It was just his word against, well, nobody's. I should also point out that Brooks's brother Nick was a police officer in the same force that Jason worked, often on the same shifts, and was thought to be quite a corrupt individual. Brooks himself actually ran for the Bardstown sheriff position, unsuccessfully, in 2014. So you have these two brothers who are likely allegedly involved in drug trafficking and corruption, a good, honest police officer who was ambushed and killed while potentially investigating them, and a partner and mother who likely knew of the brothers' corruption and dealings, who went missing in suspicious circumstances. To me, they definitely seem connected. The same day she was reported missing, her car was found abandoned with a flat tire. This was at mile marker 14 on the Bluegrass Highway, which, if you remember, was the same parkway that Jason Ellis was killed on. Her phone, keys, and purse were all still inside, but there was no sign of Crystal. And there was evidence to suggest that the police didn't really test Crystal's car very thoroughly at all, and in fact returned the car along with all of her belongings over to her mother shortly after, which is insane on a potential murder case, as you'd think something like this would be held and tested thoroughly for evidence, unless they didn't really want to find anything. A reward was announced for information regarding this case, but that has yet to be claimed, and a few days after this, Brooks was interviewed by the Nelson County Sheriff's Office, and during this interview, his brother Nick, called Brooks to warn him that the police were trying to trip him up and to frame him. And I think the likelihood that this was just an unplanned, spontaneous call is very slim. I mean, just listen to it.
Are you telling me that's what I need to do? I'm not. I know that. But the way that I look at it is, I'm innocent. I ain't done nothing wrong. Well, I know you told me innocent people have got jammed up, but if you're telling me to leave, I'll get up and leave. If you want me to, I know I'm going through a lot, but I'm trying to get this guy to help me. I don't think she's ran off with some other guy. I don't believe that. You can't make me think that. No, I'll do exactly what you're telling me to do right now. You want me to get up and leave? All right, thank you.
And after this interview, both of the brothers met up, drove out to their family farm where Crystal was last seen, and apparently stayed out there for several hours. What they did out there on the farm that night is still a complete mystery, but I'm sure you could come up with a few theories. Soon after this, Nick was interviewed by the Kentucky State Police by Detective John Snow, which I thought was kind of funny. It's even spelt exactly the same way. And in an interview with the FBI, they talked about how they knew that Nick was guilty and that he was involved in Crystal's disappearance and now likely murder.
That was the same day that he was up here being interviewed. And then after that phone call, within 2 hours, both of y'all were driving to the farm.
We didn't make a special trip out there together, if that's what you're getting at. I mean, that's just a
coincidence that y'all showed up at the same time. There is some reason why you all went out to that farm.
Something's just not adding up here.
The time.
I think the time would be better spent somewhere else. I mean,
that's all.
We're at.
I think the time would be better spent right here if we just all started telling the truth.
I don't mind to take the polygraph. I mean, I really don't.
Nick agreed to take a polygraph test and failed miserably. He was suspended from the police force and then later fired for obstruction of the investigation. And around this same time, Brooks Houck was officially named a suspect in the now suspected murder of Crystal.
That first test, you did not pass the test, and it's pretty clear to me that you haven't told me the complete truth today. And the questions you're having a problem with are questions about Crystal. And in particular, one about whether or not you know where she is right now. And it's no longer a matter of wondering, do you know anything about what happened? We're past that now. I'm no longer asking you if you know. You do. For a lie, I'm not trying to be punny, but it's crystal clear, right? What happened here. I mean, I can't make it any, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings, but I'm just telling you the truth.
That's what I'm doing to you. I'm telling you the truth.
No, you're not. We're past that.
I know nothing.
It hasn't been complete truth by a couple.
I've been 100% truthful.
Listen to what I'm saying.
You listen to what I'm saying. I've been 100% truthful.
Why are you yelling at me?
Well, because you're telling me I'm lying and I know I'm not. I know the truth, you know? And I've been 100% honest
the truth.
with you, the grand jury, and everybody else I've spoken
No,
with.
you haven't. Here's what I'm getting. We just said.
Yes, I have.
No, you haven't.
I most definitely have. And if you don't want to believe it, that's your issue. It's not mine.
It's not just me. I showed you.
Dude, I don't give a goddamn what your fucking computer said.
I
Okay?
think you do.
I'm telling you that I have been 100% honest with you.
Is this how you act when does this act this way towards Crystal?
When somebody... Is this how I act toward Crystal? I act toward people that accuse me of lying when I'm not lying.
Now, besides the brothers, there were some people, some connections that they had, that the police were also focusing on. Brooks's right-hand man, as they called him, Danny Singleton, was Brooks's employee, and he was arrested and charged with 38 counts of perjury and lying to the police. He would plead guilty to these charges and would serve only 6 months in jail. Their 82-year-old grandmother would actually be subpoenaed to testify in court, as the police wanted to ask about her car that she owned, which they believed could have been used to dispose of Crystal's body, as court documents showed that the car was parked in a peculiar location on the family farm on the night that Crystal went missing. But the car was sold shortly afterwards. She, however, refused to talk and simply just pleaded the Fifth Amendment during her testimony. Neither Nick nor Brooks were very helpful or active in the search for Crystal, and when Brooks was asked on a TV interview why not, he said that that was a reasonable question, but that he was helping in many other ways behind the scenes.
Some people have accused you of not being involved enough in the search efforts. What's your response?
That is a great question, and one I certainly appreciate you asking me. And that is, all of my efforts in searching for her have been done behind the scenes.
Yeah, I'm sure. So by this point, Crystal was yet to be found, but her parents, Sherry and Tommy Ballard, never gave up in the search for their daughter. Tommy even reluctantly admitted that Crystal was likely no longer alive, but said that he was determined to find her and to bring her home. Tommy basically took charge of the search efforts and tirelessly produced posters, handed out leaflets, organized gatherings and searches, arranged media events, basically dedicated his entire life to finding Crystal, and I absolutely don't blame him. It should also be noted that he did suspect the Houck brothers as being involved in Crystal's murder, and he regularly put up signs such as this one near the Houck's family farm. Then, again, about a year later, on November 2016, Tommy was out hunting deer with his 10-year-old grandson in a field just off Bluegrass Parkway. They were both in the field, and when his grandson went back to the car to grab something, Tommy was shot. He was shot in the chest, and when his grandson ran back to him, Tommy said to grab his phone from his jacket pocket and to call 911. But when help arrived, Tommy was already dead. Neither Tommy's nor his grandson's guns were fired that day, and the grandson said the last that he saw of Tommy, he was looking down the scope of his rifle, maybe at some deer he was hunting, or maybe at something or someone suspicious that he saw in the trees.
In honor of Tommy Ballard, who was killed a year ago today, as they continue to honor his memory and search for answers. The sign off the side of the road reads, "Justice for Tommy," a plea that continues 1 year after the Bardstown father was shot and killed, with still no answers.
Him and Sherry were high school sweethearts, you know, inseparable, you know, and I just don't know how she's doing this without him.
Tommy wasn't going to give up. He told me, he said, "I'll spend my last dollar trying to find Crystal," and that's what he wanted. He wanted to find his daughter. That's all he wanted. They were two good human beings, and they didn't deserve what they got. we'll never put it behind us. Tommy will always be there.
So, as I alluded to earlier, it is, at least in my opinion, highly likely that these cases were connected in some way. Jason Ellis was a good man and a good cop, who likely got too close to investigating or uncovering some corruption in the police force, and he ended up being killed for it. Crystal was likely killed for a similar reason, having some knowledge or information that someone didn't want her to have.
Do you think Crystal would have known something that she shouldn't have known, and that's probably why she went missing? What if she had some information that would turn his life upside down? And what if she had information on somebody like you or somebody else? What would you say about that?
I don't know where you're going with information. What kind of, what do you think?
I mean, what if she knew something about you that you didn't want anybody else in the world to know?
Her father was almost definitely killed because he was getting too close to uncovering some evidence that would likely put the Houck brothers away for life, and he wasn't going to stop anytime soon. The two outliers are, of course, Kathy and Samantha Netherland, who may potentially have had some information about the police corruption, but in my opinion they were likely just victims of a twisted, violent psychopath. But you never know. There was a ton of evidence I went through while researching this one, and there is one particular Reddit post titled "I Know More Than I Should," which was made in 2019 by the username HouckIsGuilty, which I'm surprised that wasn't already taken. I will scroll through this post briefly on screen, so if you want to pause it and read it, feel free. Otherwise, I'll link it in the description below and you can check it out in your own time. The post basically says that they are using a throwaway account to protect their identity, and lays out a bunch of claims in detail about the various investigations and about some behind the scenes information, if the post is to be believed, about the Houck brothers. So that is where our story ends. I think it's highly likely that the Houck brothers were involved in corruption and a bunch of these murders and cover-ups. But with how corrupt a lot of this police force is, and with the head start that the brothers got on Crystal's disappearance, it's seeming sadly less and less likely that the Houck brothers will ever be prosecuted for their crimes. But we can hope. And that is all we have time for. I really hope you enjoyed this one, guys, as sad and brutal as it was. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.